Good afternoon and welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. We are here for an allowable ex parte communication briefing from Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas. Today is Monday, February 27th, 3:01 p.m. Before we get started, let's take a roll call of commissioners. With us virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner J. Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner C. Williams, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. At this point, I'd like to recognize our staff counsel, Ms. Alicia Clausen, to read the docket. You're on. Well, you're on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioners, and to all who are present here today, in person or virtually. Today is Monday, February 27th, 2023, and we're here in the Commission's hearing room pursuant to a notice of request for allowable ex parte communication briefing in ND-2023-6-E from Duke Energy Carolinas, LLC and Duke Energy Progress, LLC regarding Winter Storm Elliott and its impact on the company's operations. This matter has been noticed on the Commission's website as required by South Carolina Code Annotated Section 58-3-5. What is it? 360. C6. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clausen. Let's take appearances from the parties. Just the appearances at this point, and who's here with Duke Energy Carolinas LLC and Duke Energy Progress LLC?
Good afternoon, Chair Belzer, members of the Commission. I'm Katie Brown. I'm in-house counsel for Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress. Also here today is Frank Ellerby.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Welcome to you and Mr. Ellerby. And who is here as our neutral today?
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, my name is Ben Muschin. I'm appearing today on behalf of the Executive Director of the Office of Regulatory Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Muschin, and welcome to you too. We have some ground rules that we need to put on the record, and I'll recognize Ms. Clausen.
Thank you. The subject matter notice to be discussed today relates to Duke Energy Carolinas, LLC and Duke Energy Progress, LLC's briefing on Winter Storm Elliott and its impact on the company's operations. I would remind everyone this is a briefing and not a hearing. The briefing must be conducted in compliance with the provisions of South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260C, and the requirements of that statute are, in part, that the allowable ex parte briefing be confined to the subject matter which has been noticed. I would ask the presenters, commissioners, and staff to please refrain from discussing any matters not related to the specific topics. The statute prohibits any presenter, commissioners, or commission staff from requesting or giving any commitment, predetermination, or prediction regarding any action by any commissioner as to the ultimate issue which either is or is likely to come before the commission. I would ask the presenters, staff, and commissioners to refrain from referencing any report, article, statute, or document of any kind that are not included in today's presentation. A copy of any document which is referenced during the briefing must be provided to the Office of Regulatory Staff for inclusion into the record, which will be certified to the Chief Clerk of the Commission, Ms. Jocelyn Boyd. If anyone during the course of this briefing exceeds the scope or does not comply with or fails to conduct themselves within the provisions of South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260 governing allowable ex parte briefings, it is expected that a contemporaneous objection will be made. Everyone in attendance today, in person or virtually, must sign in and register. Everyone in the hearing room or watching virtually must read, sign, and return the form which you were provided at the door, or the form which will be emailed to you for your virtual appearance, which will include instructions and the deadline for its return. It is required by law for each attendee, whether attending virtually or in person, to certify that the requirements contained in Section 58-3-260C have been complied with in this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clausen. Mr. Mustian, I would ask if the neutral has any further instructions with regard to today's briefing.
Madam Chair, I believe Ms. Clausen covered everything well. One thing, and if I repeat what she said, then please forgive me, but just to be clear, I think that the company had not asked for confidential treatment of any of the matters in the presentation, and so would ask the presenters from referencing any confidential material or from the commissioners asking for anything that may be confidential.
Thank you, Mr. Mustian. That's a good rule of thumb to go by in these briefings. Thank you for adding that. Ms. Ms. Brown, would you like to introduce who you have with us? Excuse me, Mr. Ellaby, let me recognize you. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Frank Ellerby, I just wanted to put something on the record for clarification. Ms. Taryn Sims is going to be making our presentation covering the matters in slides 16 through 23. Those slides discuss the communications that DEC and DEP had with customers during the course of the Elliott storm and related events. And there are references on those slides to documents, communications by the company to customers. Many of those communications are in the appendix to these slides and are actually part of this slide deck. However, as Mr. Mustian and I discussed this morning, and I've confirmed with Ms. Sims this afternoon, all of the communications are not, at this point in time, part of the appendix. We will be supplementing as the rule requires, as the statutory provision allows. We will be supplementing and adding and filing in this docket the comprehensive set of all of the communications that were made to customers, and including those that we've already submitted as part of the appendix. And she will be able to respond and explain the communications that were made. But I just wanted to put that on the record so there wasn't any confusion. We will be supplementing following this briefing.
Thank you, Mr. Ellaby. And that's an agreement, Mr. Mustian?
Yes, Madam Chair.
So even though they may not be before us today, they will end up in the record that will be on the DMS.
That's right. Like
for
other
public
documents
viewing.
that get brought
Correct.
up during a briefing that we supplement as we always have. So
Appreciate that clarification, Mr. Ellaby. Thank
just
you.
thought it would be, go ahead and put it on the record. And I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Brown now for the introduction of our panelists.
Thank you. Ms.
Thank you.
Brown, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Seem to be having some issues turning this mic on. I'd like to introduce our speakers today. First, for our introduction, we have Mike Callahan, the South Carolina State President. Panel one, Sam Holman, Vice President, Transmission System Planning and Operations. Nelson Peeler, SVP, Transmission and Fuel Strategy and Policy. Paul Dreyevich, SVP, Chief Regulated and Renewable Energy Officer. On our second panel, Scott Batson. I believe his name is misspelled on his placard there, so we apologize for that. It is actually Batson. Bonnie Tatone, SVP and Chief Information Officer, and Taryn Sims, VP Marketing, Insight, and Customer Engagement. Since we only have 6 seats up here, after Mr. Callahan gives his introductory remarks, we'll have him step back, and Mr. Dreyevich will take his seat if that suits the commission.
That's fine, Ms. Brown. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let y'all drive this presentation as y'all see fit. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate you being here today and for bringing us this information. So with that, I'll let y'all go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Callahan, President of Duke Energy South Carolina, and it's good to be with you here today. On behalf of our company, I wanted to thank you, Chair Belzer, Vice Chair Powers, the Commission, for providing us this opportunity to share our experiences regarding Winter Storm Elliott. I know this topic came up briefly during the Duke Energy Progress rate case, and I'm pleased to be joined by several of my subject matter experts here and operational leaders who can discuss the event in more detail. Winter Storm Elliott was an extraordinarily powerful weather event with a unique confluence of high winds, extreme temperature drops, and other conditions that forced Duke Energy and other energy service providers in the region to curtail power as a last resort on Christmas Eve. We thank the customers who helped us get through the event and share everyone's goal of learning for the future. During Christmas week of 2022, the storm ushered in high winds and severe cold temperatures that created a national weather emergency through much of the continental United States. Temperatures were much lower than typical in our region, and they also dropped at a very fast rate, much faster than what we would normally see. The storm created strained manpower and generation resources for utilities across much of the country. Duke Energy was managing severe weather events over the week preceding Christmas, including our extreme cold weather preparation. And on Friday, December 23rd, we were restoring 300,000 outages from Winter Storm Elliot's significant wind effects. And on December 24th, after triggering our demand response programs, Duke Energy grid operators had to implement its general load reduction plan in the Carolinas to protect the integrity of the grid. A series of events, including rapidly plunging temperatures, demand for electricity that outpaced projections, diminished generation capacity, and firm power we purchased from PJM not being delivered as expected, put us in a position where energy demand eclipsed our capacity. About 500,000 customers in the Carolinas were impacted by the temporary interruptions of service on Christmas Eve, and those customers were restored by 3:45 p.m. that afternoon. From a South Carolina perspective, we estimate about 78,000 were impacted in Duke Energy Carolinas and about 17,000 in Duke Energy Progress. Leading into Christmas Eve, Duke Energy believed we had sufficient power to get us through the day based on our forecasts. However, early that morning, demand rose faster than our models predicted, and some of Duke Energy's generation capacity was diminished. We were also relying upon firm purchases from third parties, including PJM, but those providers were facing similar challenges and did not deliver the power that we were promised and were relying upon. In fact, they were asking to buy our power because they were in the same position that we faced. This is an important factor as we consider future resource adequacy needs. At that time, we made the only decision we could to protect grid integrity. And for the first and only time in our company's history, we implemented rotating outages in the Carolinas. With moderating temperatures, generation returning to service, additional available generation purchases arriving, and with customer conservation activities, as I discussed, we were able to meet customer load over the remainder of the winter storm event on December 25th and 26th. Although the majority of our power plants of all fuel sources performed well, the outage process did not go as well as we had planned or would have liked. We had numerous communications regarding our plans, explaining that the outages were planned for 15 to 30 minutes, but technical issues prevented Duke from getting customers back online as quickly as we had planned. In addition, Duke Energy had to manually restore customers instead of using our automated tools. And as the outage lengthened, the load reached a cold state, increasing the system loading during restoration, a complicating factor known as cold load pickup, which you will hear more about today from our operational experts. We continue to learn from the event, and while we are proud of our employees and the good work to keep our systems intact and prevent more severe outages, we also recognize that we have some work to do on our communication channels, which you'll also hear about today. I'd also add that in recognition of the difficulties faced during that time, the Duke Energy Foundation provided $52,000 across South Carolina to support nonprofit organizations that stood up warming centers for customers that were affected by the loss of power. Before I surrender my seat, so we can bring the first panel up here, I'd like to introduce the topics that our speakers will cover. Our first panel will be Sam Holman, our Vice President of Transmission Planning and Operations, who will discuss the timeline and overview of the event. Nelson Peeler, our Senior Vice President and Chief Transmission Officer, who will discuss forecasting and procurement. and Paul Dreyovich, our Chief Generation Officer of Regulated and Renewable Energy, who will focus on generation and the operation of our plants. Our second panel will consist of Scott Batson, our Senior Vice President and Chief Distribution Officer, who will be discussing load shed and outage restoration. Bonnie Titone, our Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer, who will share information on some technology challenges we faced during the event. And then finally, Taryn Sims, our Vice President of Marketing Insights and Customer Engagement, who will discuss our communications with customers. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the first panel to get into some of the details of the event.
Thank you, Mr. Callahan.
Thank you, Mike.
Gentlemen, you have to really speak into these microphones if you don't mind so that we can make sure we're capturing everything that's said. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Before I go into the timeline for both DEP and DEC, I do want to make some observations about Winter Storm Elliott. Starting on Monday the 13th, we looked ahead, Monday the 19th, excuse me, we looked ahead for the upcoming week. And as we projected out into the Saturday, which was Christmas Eve, the 24th, we projected to have enough generation resources to meet our customer load and our operating reserve. Now, operating reserve is a characteristic of what balancing authority operators do to ensure they have enough generation, unused generation, to meet the needs that can come up in real-time operations. We kind of, as we train our operators, our system operators who function in the balancing authority role, we describe it as it's your tools in the toolbox to deal with energy and capacity situations. And they're there for things like load forecast error, forced outages, regulation, things that can happen in real-time operations that you don't have control over. They create margin so our operators can deal with the uncertainty that's coming up in that particular day. So as we looked ahead from Monday into Saturday, we believed at that point in time we had enough capacity and energy to cover our customers' demand and to meet our operating reserve targets. As Mike stated, our load forecast under-forecasted over the course of this period of time. Our algorithms in both DEP and DEC are regression-based algorithms. That means they take independent variables or variables we cannot control, such as weather, such as wind speed, such as dew point, things like that, and it forecasts whatever you're trying to forecast. And in our case, we're attempting to forecast customer load, customer demand over that window of time. And there were a combination of issues that presented challenges to these algorithms. We have multiple algorithms that Mr. Peeler can speak to in just a minute. But as we went into this week, we were looking at on Saturday the coldest December temperatures since the 1980s. I believe it was 1989, Nelson. I believe that's correct. We were also, as Mike had indicated, we were coming off some pretty severe winds the day before. The winds on Saturday morning weren't as high as the winds on Friday, but it did create that wind chill. We were also looking at very low dew points. That's typical in cold weather, but it does add to the wind chill effect. And as Mike also said, we were also looking at temperatures that were bottoming out from 5 o'clock on Friday the 23rd. At 0500 that morning, the temperatures were roughly 52 in the Raleigh DEP area, Duke Energy Progress area, and those are customer load center weighted temperatures. That means we weight the part of the geography that has more customers higher than the other geographies because we're attempting to forecast load. And the temperatures on 0500 on the 23rd, that Friday, in DEC were 48, system average. They progressively went down through the next 12 hours, and they bottomed out at 8 degrees in DEC and 12 degrees in DEP. And contrary to a normal load pattern, we peaked on Friday the 23rd at 2200 hours, 10 o'clock that evening. And so it was those were factors that our algorithms didn't have a lot of history with. And so we under-forecast, as we look back now with more clarity, we under-forecasted approximately 10% in DEC, Duke Energy Carolinas, and roughly 5 to 8% in DEP, Duke Energy Progress. Now, we have talked to our vendors, we've talked to others of our neighbors, and as you have probably read in some of the write-ups, that is in line with what other balancing authorities were experiencing in terms of under forecasting. And that was one of the unique things about Winter Storm Elliott. Everybody was having this problem. Everybody, all of our neighbors in the Eastern Interconnection were having this same problem of under forecasting their load. And when I say under forecast, I mean they were forecasting a load that was less than what the load actually was. So as we looked ahead into the weekend, we knew it was going to get colder. And as you all know, and now with hindsight being 2020, Hurricane Elliott was a national storm. So as we looked ahead, so when we got through the 24th, we still had the 25th and the 26th to get through. And we did a couple things there to be ready for those next couple of days to guard against having to shed load again the 25th and the 26th. The first thing we did, the algorithms, the load forecast algorithms, calibrated themselves. They learned from the experience. It now has a history that's closer in of temperatures that were down at 12 and 8 degrees. And so by that added information, the forecast got better. In addition to that, we manually calibrated those models to make sure they reflected the loads we believed we would have achieved if we hadn't a load shed. And then we also went another step to add a kind of a conservative approach to this and added 800 megawatts to our load target in Duke Energy Carolinas and an additional 600 megawatts in Duke Energy Progress to test ourselves on our readiness to meet our customer demand on Sunday and Monday. We were able to get some additional generation that Mr. Drevich will talk about later on for Monday, and we were able to make some additional purchases in both DEP and DEC that held Sunday and Monday, and we were able to avoid having to shed load on Sunday and Monday. So now I'm going to step through the timelines, and we've got the first timeline up here. I'll start with Duke Energy Carolinas. So at approximately 6 p.m. on Friday the 23rd, based on the information we had, we believed we projected to be able to meet our customer demand with approximately 1,500 megawatts of operating reserve to deal with all the uncertainties that may come up. That's an important number because that means we can meet the loss of our largest unit, because everybody was having this challenge. And when everybody is facing a common weather situation, you know everybody's going to be challenged the same way you are. So us being able to meet the loss of the largest unit was very important. And in DEC, just for your reference, that's approximately 1,200 megawatts. Starting at about 7 p.m. of the 23rd, we began to see in Duke Energy Carolinas a divergence from actual load and forecasted load. Actual load was outpacing, increasing at a more rapid rate than our forecasts were indicating to us. At 2200, 10 o'clock on the 23rd, we still projected to meet our load, our customer demand with an additional 900 megawatts of operating reserve, but the actual load continued to outpace our projections on load forecast. At this point in time, we knew going across the peak on the 24th was going to be extremely challenging. We didn't know exactly when that peak would occur because, as you know, this was over a holiday weekend plus over a weekend. Both of those are factors that typically drive load down, but that was not what we were seeing as we monitored what our forecasts were saying and what the load was actually doing. From midnight on Friday the 23rd to about 6 a.m. on the 24th, we experienced several events that depleted our operating reserves. Thank you. At approximately midnight, one of our combined cycle facilities, Dan River, had to derate by approximately 360 megawatts. That is an approximate 725 megawatt facility. It did not come offline, it derated. So from 725, they had to reduce 360 megawatts. That's important because when a unit stays online, it can still produce voltage support that's really important during these challenging load conditions. So it didn't trip, but it was derated. It's kind of an industry term that's used to describe what happens when the unit stays online, but it's derated in its maximum output. Actual load continued to outpace our forecast. Our projections were, at that point in time, for about 200 megawatts of operating reserve across the peak on Saturday morning. At approximately
Madam Chair,
Oh, yes.
Commissioner Thomas?
I know we're not called for questions yet, but I would just like to hear a little bit better explanation of what derated means.
Yes, sir.
I'm not an engineer. It's fairly meaningless to me.
I was thinking the same thing, Commissioner, so thank you for asking.
I'll be happy to do that, and Mr. Drevich, you can help me out if I get so. Why don't you take it, Paul?
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, basically what derated means, if a unit is designed to operate and say produce 1,000 megawatts at full load capacity, if for some reason a piece of equipment does not allow us to reach 1,000 megawatts, and whether it's 900 or 800, we would say it's derated from 1,000 megawatts and its maximum capacity is at a lower level. And it's typically due to equipment condition within the facility.
May I?
So are you saying that there was something wrong with Dan River, something happened that caused it not to work up to its normal standards? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, Dan River was derated by approximately 50%. We had a sensing line that froze that'll caused us to lose 50% of the generation due to loss of instrumentation in the site.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Holman, I'm going to ask you if you can pull that microphone a little bit closer, just so we can make sure everybody can hear you.
All right.
Thank you. I know you're trying to look at all of us and your head turns a little bit, and just want everybody to hear. Thank
I
you.
want you to hear too.
Madam Chair, I have a quick question if we can take it up.
Commissioner Irvin?
Based on the last response. I'm wondering, that line that was frozen, is the line insulated, was it insulated prior to this event?
Yes, Commissioner, the line was insulated and heat traced. Functionality was checked as part of cold weather preparation prior to the cold weather season.
Okay, as a result of this weather event experience, do you have any plans to mitigate this reoccurring again in the unlikely event it does? Are there any plans to further insulate or heat the line going forward?
Yes, we are conducting a cause analysis on any of the instrumentation lines that froze. In fact, across the entire fleet, there were 4 instrumentation lines that did cause us issue. There's a cause analysis being conducted on each one of those, and there will be improvements to that heat trace system and insulation, along with evaluation of all of the heat traces and insulation systems for the entire fleet.
Thank you. Is that some information that may become available when it's available? Could you share that with the commission?
We can.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Holman, please continue.
So at this point in time, we believed across the peak we'd be able to meet our customer demand with about 200 megawatts of operating reserve. At that point in time, at about 04:50 in the morning of Saturday the 24th, we lost a Lincoln combustion turbine unit, which is about 100 megawatts. It was able to return to service before the peak and load to 100 megawatts, but it did present more uncertainty to the system operators as they looked ahead, knew they had more load growth, and had to make decisions on how we're going to get from 04:30 to the peak and meet our compliance obligations. At this point in time, we had purchases of 400 megawatts of firm purchases and 250 megawatts of non-firm purchases from a marketer in the PJM area. Those purchases were curtailed. One thing to remember about the non-firm purchase, we made that earlier in the morning to provide margin for the load that we were anticipated having, and it was never delivered. It was curtailed before it started. At that point in time, a third-party independent power producing generation site, that means it's not owned and operated by Duke Energy, came offline at about 350 megawatts of firm supply. At this point in time, in addition to that, several of our wholesale customers and DEC began to have problems meeting their obligations because they were seeing the same cold weather and same issues with purchases that we were. Up until this point, we had called on all of our demand response that was available to us at this point in time in DEC. That had totaled up to approximately 200 megawatts. We were following, as Mike mentioned earlier, our GLRP, our General Load Reduction Plan. By 6 in the morning on the 24th, our area control error was negative and moving more negative. And let me take a minute to try to review what area control error is. It is an indication that appears in our balancing control console that tells the operator, are you in balance with your customer load and your interconnection frequency obligation? Negative indicates that you are not meeting your obligation. And so when an operator sees a negative ACE, that's the term that's used within the industry, area control error, he or she knows that they are not meeting their obligation to balance load and to support interconnection frequency.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Caston?
while you're on this slide, I want to make sure I understand the distinction, the difference in firm purchase supply, non-firm purchase supply of 400 megawatts of firm purchase supply. I think I know the difference between the two, but what is firm purchase supply?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So the distinction between the two, a firm purchase supply has assurance that it will be delivered unless there is some emergency type situation that prevents that. So it has a much higher deliverability than a non-firm does. So if there are needs to curtail purchases, for example, non-firms will be eliminated first, firms would be last. In general practice, they are as rarely interrupted, a firm purchase, because it has that assurance that's behind it that it will be delivered. It is not a variable or an optional type thing. It has to be delivered unless there's some force majeure or other action that prevents it from being delivered. So in this case, we had firm purchase, including a firm transmission path that was procured for roughly 900 megawatts. And we had also procured 250 megawatts of non-firm energy as an additional margin, as Mr. Holman said.
Thank you.
Thank you. So at this point in time, the Eastern Interconnection, which we in South Carolina and North Carolina are part of a large interconnection of electric devices, including generations, including load, including transmission distribution, stretches from the Rockies to the Atlantic Ocean, up into Canada, down to the tip of Florida to the border of Texas. Many believe it's the largest synchronously operating machine man has ever made. It is an extremely large operating interconnection. Its measure of health, one measure of health is called frequency. Its target is 60 hertz. And so during this period of time, the system operators are looking at really 4 metrics that are displayed to them in their console. One is interconnection frequency. Each of us as a balancing authority is obligated to support interconnection frequency. 2 is our area control area, as I described it earlier. It's our balancing equation. It's where frequencies for the whole interconnection, ACE is for our balancing authority. We have 2 of them we're talking about today, Duke Energy Carolinas, Duke Energy Progress. And the other one is, where's your load forecast going? Where's your load going? Is it continuing to go up? Is it leveled out? Is it slowing down? And then the final one is, how much operating reserve do you have left? Because that's your margin. That's what you're having to deal with the load. If it's increasing, is your operating reserve. So at this point in time, interconnection frequency was below 60 hertz. 60 hertz is the target. And I was in the control center in Charlotte at about 4:30 in the morning. I was watching frequency, and you could see it. It would struggle to make 60, and then it would slowly trend down. and then it would struggle back up and not quite get to 60, and then it would continue to go down. And what that's saying is people all across the Eastern Interconnection were using whatever resources they had, generation, demand side response, whatever they had, they were tapping into it. Frequency would recover slightly, but that load was still increasing across the whole Eastern Interconnection. And we were contributing to that below target performance because our ACE was negative. That puts our system operators working the balancing authority console in a very difficult situation. Frequency is low, that presents risk to the interconnection, and we are part of that problem. As we continued to move towards the peak, we had called on all generation we had available to us. We had called, and our operators talk on the phone constantly to our neighbors. There was nothing left to be purchased. We worked with Mr. Peeler's organization to make sure there was nothing left to be purchased. I think as Mr. Callahan said, people were calling us, asking us for help. And as we continue to move towards the peak, to kind of give you a feel to what our ACE was doing, area control area. Remember, negative hurts frequency, and the more negative it gets, the more it's hurting. So at 0500, the DEC area control area was minus 152 megawatts. At 0530, the Duke Energy Carolinas area control area was minus 290 megawatts. At 0610, the Duke Energy Carolinas area control area was minus 400 megawatts. And at 0700, the DEC area control area was minus 448 megawatts. And load was still coming higher. And at this point in time, we had depleted all of our operating reserve. The operators were faced with a very difficult decision. In addition to this, we were communicating to all of our neighboring reliability coordinators and balancing authorities with what NERC has described as energy emergency alerts, EEAs. EEA 1 says you're beginning to run out of operating reserves. EEA 2 means you have reached the point where you've used all your operating reserves and you're using your demand side management and your demand side your demand response. And then EEA 3 indicates you are preparing to shed firm load. And we had progressed from being in EEA 1 the day before, because we knew it was going to be really tough. And most utilities and most balancing authorities did the same thing. At approximately 0410 on the 24th in the morning, we moved to EEA 2. And at 0605, the morning of the 24th, we moved to EEA 3, which is telling all of our neighbors, all of our reliability coordinators, that we are on the verge and are preparing and are prepared to shed firm load. As we sat there at about 6 in the morning, interconnection frequency was still below and struggling to even begin to recover to 60 hertz, and our ACE was getting more negative. At this point in time, the decision was made to trigger distribution rotating load shed in a controlled manner. That started at 0614. We peaked hour ending 0700 at 20,903 megawatts. That includes approximately 1,000 megawatts of load shed that we had implemented over the course of those 45 minutes. We crossed zero, which on ACE, area control area, that means you're in balance and you're supporting frequency at approximately 0847. At this point in time, we still had customers in load shed mode, and we had started restoration at approximately 0903 that morning. We came out of our NERC energy emergency alert when all of our customers had been restored in DEC, and that was approximately 4 o'clock. I'll now move on to Duke.
Mr. Holman, when you said 4 o'clock, are you talking about in the morning or in the afternoon? That's what I want to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. Now moving on to Duke Energy progress. Thank you for advancing the slides. You'll hear a very similar sequence of events, but different timing. So approximately 6 p.m. on 12/23, DEP was projecting to meet our load, our customer obligations, plus having over 1,100 megawatts of operating reserve. Just like in DEC, that would cover the largest unit in Duke Energy Progress, which is approximately 1,000 megawatts. At 2 a.m. on the morning of the 24th in Duke Energy Progress, we still projected to have over 1,000 megawatts of operating reserve as we headed to the peak. Between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., several events began to deplete our operating reserves. Number one, Roxboro 3 was derated by approximately 325 megawatts. At this point in time in DEP, Duke Energy Progress, we started to see that same divergence of actual load versus forecasted load. Our Mayo 1 unit was derated by approximately 350 megawatts. In this window of time, we also lost 500 megawatts of firm purchases from a marketer in PJM. A DEP network customer lost approximately 115 megawatts of a firm purchase as well. And then we lost 175 megawatts from Broad River, which is an IPP outside of Duke Energy Progress, owned and operated by another company. This totals to a generation loss of approximately 1,500 megawatts in that window of time in the run-up to the morning. Similar to Duke Energy Carolinas, by 6:20 in the morning, we had no more generation to bring on, no more demand response, nothing we could purchase. We had depleted all of our operating reserves in DEP. Just like DEC, our area control area was negative and growing more negative. Same kind of pattern of times. At 0500, DEP's ACE, area control area, was minus 52. At 0600, Duke Energy Progress's ACE was negative 318 megawatts. At 0618, DEP's ACE was negative 940 megawatts. And then at 0625, DEP's ACE was negative 638. DEP entered the energy alert structure later than DEC did. We hit EEA1 at approximately 0537.
Madam Chair?
Yep.
Commissioner Thomas?
Excuse me again. So you mentioned at 6 a.m. you lost 120 megawatts from a Duke Progress Network customer who lost firm purchase.
Yes, sir.
Can you explain to me what that means?
Yeah, yes, sir. So we, in the balancing authority, we are responsible for all customers, all electrically connected customers within the metered boundaries of our balancing authority. It's Duke regulated customers. It's also wholesale customers. And this particular wholesale customer has obligations to meet their load, and they had an off-system purchase that was curtailed. I mean, Mr. Taylor, is that roughly right?
It is. Maybe to try to be a little clearer, we typically, we're not under contract to provide them service. These customers are provided service from another source. But in the event of the loss of their generation or supply, that responsibility falls to the balancing authority. So the point here is that when their schedule was cut, that added to our load obligation during this emergency. Does that help?
Yes, that's kind of what I thought. Just wanted to make sure.
Yep.
So we entered Energy Emergency Alert 2 and Duke Energy Progress at 0606, the morning of the 24th. We entered EEA 3, Energy Emergency Alert 3, at 0634. Again, just like in DEP, interconnection frequency was straight. It's the same interconnection frequency, so DEP and DEC were seeing the same number. It was struggling to get to 60 hertz and drifting below 60 hertz. And we were negative in our area control area in DEP. At this point in time, those conditions drove the decision in DEP to, again, trigger a distribution rotating load shed event at approximately 0625. We peaked at our ending 0600 at 14,071 megawatts. That was affected by approximately 911 megawatts of load shed that was requested up to that point. We crossed zero ACE, which means you're balanced with your load and generation and you're meeting your frequency obligation, support obligations at approximately 0800. Similar to DEC, at this point in time, we still had load shed customers in load shed mode. We started the customer restoration process in DEP at 0812 in the morning. We came out of our EEA 3 and DEP when all load shed customers were restored, and that was approximately at 4:24 that afternoon of the 24th. As you can see from the timeline, events happened in the morning hours very quickly in both DEP and DEC. And given the national storm nature of Elliott, all of our neighbors were in similar situations. We're talking to them constantly within the hour, many times, within 10-minute windows. We're talking with them several times an hour. And everybody that we talked to was either planning to shed load or on the verge of shedding load. The decisions to shed load are severe decisions. Our operators are trained to make those really tough decisions. As I told you before, I was in there watching them. They were deliberate. They were disciplined. They were methodical, and they were cautious. They knew what they were doing. They knew the gravity of the decisions they were making affecting our customers and our communities in DEP and DEC. In many of those situations, the operators knew they were shedding their own homes. They knew they were on the rotating load shed plan. And nonetheless, their job is to protect the Eastern interconnection. And what they're protecting it against, and hopefully you've heard me deliberately use a term of load shed, a controlled, directed load shed, as opposed to a cascading blackout. That's what happened in August of 2003. That was an uncontrolled blackout driven by a different factor. That was more driven by voltage and voltage support. But what we were defending against is the same thing. You lose control of the system and it cascades, and physics solves the problem for you. You never want to let physics solve that problem for you because you don't know who's going to be without power and who's going to be with power. That's why system operators are acting in the interest of the Eastern interconnection. That's why they made those decisions in a controlled manner to shed load so that we would be back in a position of supporting Eastern interconnection frequency. And that's really important as we go through this, because the operators did exactly what we needed them to do, along with operators in other jurisdictions. And what we're defending against, as I said, is the uncontrolled loss of the system. We weren't on the ragged edge of that because you've got, the first step is controlled distribution load shed. If that hadn't worked, we'd have gone into transmission load shed, which is cutting large chunks of load out in an effort to get frequency back up to 60. After that, there's load shedding technology and relays that protects generations by shedding larger chunks of load. And if that doesn't work, then you're really at risk for the interconnection being in a cascading, uncontrolled loss of system event. Operators did exactly what they needed to do.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Caston?
So what I think I've heard are these slides telling me that a combination of things. One, the Duke companies used every available generation source they had, whether that's coal, wind, solar, gas, nuclear, and I guess agreements on these firm and non-firm. I mean, everything you had.
Yes, sir.
And I'll not mention Murphy's Law because it's probably not technically sound. But these things all occurred in some shape, form, or fashion.
Yes, sir. That was, and one thing you'd mentioned all those resources. You are correct. We deployed every resource we had at our disposal, both generation-based, purchase-based, and demand response-based. But when I was driving in that morning, I heard the weather forecast, and they said sunrise will be at 07:30. All of this happened before 07:30. So solar performed as expected. It helped us in the recovery. It allowed us to do some things that Mr. Drevich will talk about in a minute to get ready for the 25th and the 26th. But we tapped into everything we could possibly tap into. Now, yes, sir. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holman.
It was a tough day, but our folks did exactly what we would expect them to do.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Madam Chair.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Commissioner Irvin, I heard Commissioner Williams first, and then we'll come to you. Thank you.
Stand by.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sir, I can't see your name.
Sam Holman.
Mr. Holman. So I want to make a couple of acknowledgments. First, I want to thank you and your folks for what you do, because running an operations center and transmission, I've recently discovered, is way more complicated than I ever thought it was. Trying to figure out how much electricity consumers will use in real time it takes a lot of high level math, physics, as you said, and I guess some economics that I really didn't take in school. So I appreciate what you all do. Don't take it for granted. But unfortunately, we're in this situation and we're trying to figure out how it never happens again. Here's where I have a little bit of confusion, and it may be because we're here in South Carolina, not in North Carolina. When you say balancing authority, I understand that concept. But how does it relate to the responsibility you have to your regulated customers?
So within our balancing authority are our regulated customers.
Mm-hmm.
If we're meeting our obligations as a balancing authority, we're meeting our obligations to our customers the vast majority of the time. But there are times when system operators, per NERC standards, are required to make those tough decisions.
Mm-hmm.
We have a measure, without trying to get into too much detail, it's called the Balancing Authority ACE limit. That is our compliance measure that operators are required to stay within the bounds within 30 minutes. We were bouncing around 20 minutes for pretty much from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock that morning. And what that means is you are now at risk for the next thing to break. And that is one thing we train our operators. Hope is not a plan. To sit there and say, I hope all my generation hangs in there. Mr. Drevich's team does a great job. They were out in the weather making sure our resources were running. They did a tremendous job. But as operators, system operators, whose job is to protect the Eastern interconnection, we can't take that chance. We can't say, we hope the weather breaks. We hope that generation stays online. We have to proactively get out in front of it. Because our goal is to avoid the cascade piece. We want to be in control. We don't want to let physics solve the problem. Did that help at all, Commissioner?
Oh, almost. I think what I'm trying to figure out is how Duke works with, say, PJM. You sell them power. I think it's on the bilateral market. They're wholesalers. You sell them power, right?
I think Nelson, Mr. Peeler.
That's correct. It's a bilateral market. We can sell or purchase.
Okay. So this is where I get confused, and please suffer my ignorance. I don't think, does that happen in South Carolina? Is there any PJM is a RTO, right?
That's correct.
Okay. In South Carolina, are there any RTOs or ISOs operating?
No, but as the Duke's balancing authority transacts with PJM, and South Carolina is inside of Duke's balancing authority. So purchases and sales that Duke undertakes with PJM would also impact South Carolina customers.
Right. And right. As it stands now, but just hypothetically, let's say PJM did not exist. Would you have more electricity available for your regulated customers? Hypothetically.
No, I mean, we wouldn't sell, we would meet our load obligation to our customers before we make any sales.
Okay. Taking that hypothetical further, PJM didn't exist, so you couldn't depend on that firm purchase agreement. How would you generate electricity?
Yeah, so prior to PJM's existence, we have bilateral trades with other companies, so with neighboring utilities. So we have bilateral trading with Southern Company, with TVA, with other South Carolina companies. And so prior to PJM's existence, we had bilateral trades with the companies that were operating those assets. So we would still have a bilateral trading market without an RTO in place.
Okay. So, and thank you for that. What I haven't heard yet, and maybe you all may get to it, and again, suffer my ignorance here, this is the way that I would do it, I think, at least. You're going through your timeline, it's all bad. Nothing good has happened yet, right? there was not an opportunity to flip a switch that says, you know what, we don't have enough power. We need to ramp up a generation unit so we can have power to serve our customers. Why wasn't that an option?
Because we had depleted all of our operating reserves. There was nothing else to turn to. Mr. Trevich, you can confirm that, I think.
That is correct. All the units that we had available were in service.
Okay. So I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question. Do you think you need more units in order to, I know this was a one-off, but to effectively prevent this from ever happening at all? It's not even a remote possibility for an event like this to happen again. How would you solve that problem?
I'll let you get enough.
So in this case, this event, the region-wide nature of it was a generation unavailability or a generation issue. It was not enough resources to meet the load, not just in Duke Energy, but widespread. So one of our actions out of this is we have to look hard at that. Do we have an appropriate planning reserve margin, to your point? Is the performance of the generation fleet appropriate for the cold weather? Or are there other actions that need to be taken? So we have to look at all those things. And another piece is do we need to consider how much we rely on purchases during such an event? So is the planning reserve appropriate? Are purchases appropriate? And is our performance appropriate? I think those are all three things we'll look hard at out of this event to determine that we have the right reserve margins and the right availability for such an event in the future. It's kind of a combination.
And Commissioner Williams, one point to add on to that. Mr. Peeler's exactly right. This was a generation adequacy event. It was capacity and energy. This was not a transmission event. To our knowledge, there were no transmission loading events called that would impact the Southeast, which means that the lack of generation or voltage or something like that is causing generation to be derated. This was just raw. We didn't have enough of it. There was just not enough. And based on the information we know now, that's why our purchases were curtailed, is that nobody had enough. The people we had contracted to purchase from didn't have enough. So you had mentioned everything works against you. So we've had cold weather before. It's been cold before in the Carolinas. But what makes this one different is the load, the weather, the generation, and the purchases all worked against us. We lost our purchases. We had some outages on our generation, and the temperatures and the load just put us in this situation that drove us to have to make the tough decision to shed load.
Understood. So would, hypothetically, building another generational facility or unit answer this question, resolve this issue?
I think it would certainly help.
I mean, I know this is a total oversimplification. I get that. But we didn't have enough. Folks we depended on, or you depended on to provide it for you through the firm purchase agreement, didn't have enough. And it resulted in the forced load shedding. And while I'm sure there are other contributing factors to this, there have been reports of some very serious consequences of South Carolina customers losing power. The ultimate consequence.
Yes.
And in that specific instance, I'm sure that they would have wanted power. And I'm just wondering whether or not we're looking at this from the perspective, at least as an option. It may not be the best course of action, but at least as an option to consider a world where this just can't happen because there's so much generation available, or there's again, oversimplification, a flip to switch to ramp up some unit in enough time to avoid putting your operators in the difficult position that they were in. Am I making sense?
Yes, sir. You're making sense. I think and I think Mr. Peeler spoke to that, I think from the system operator perspective, we will always train our operators on what if it doesn't work. Because I think you all want our operators in a position to make those difficult decisions that prevent something much worse from happening. It's tough. They understood the gravity of it. I watched them. They communicated very effectively. They were using three-part communication. They were talking to everybody, trying to find whatever was available, and it just wasn't. And then they reached a point where they had to make that decision. So we're kind of those sentinels that are managing that are guarding against the uncontrolled happening. So as operators, we'll deal with the system that's in front of us, and I think we want them to do that.
Thank you, Jim.
Sam, if I may, Commissioner Williams, at the end, I will wrap up in terms of some of the lessons learned and some of the things that we're doing. You're hitting on a key point here in terms of one of the things we'll be looking at. Mr. Dreyovich will talk a little bit about some of the units that were in outages, some planned and some that were unplanned because of equipment issues. We'll be looking at how we manage those outages, the timing of those outages. We'll be looking at our generation mix, and we'll be looking at that reserve margin that we maintain at all times, but very specifically whenever we go into some type of grid alert, we'll have some additional requirements relative to that margin that we will maintain for severe weather events. So we'll speak to that a little bit more in terms of making sure that that generation is available. I would also offer that even there are other drivers that could end up even off system that could impact our grid. So to be able to say that we could prevent this from ever happening again, there's things that would be beyond our control despite the generation. And I wanted to make sure I highlighted that.
If you wouldn't mind sharing, what are some of those things?
Sam?
Yeah. So when you look at frequency, it's driven by generation across the Eastern Interconnection. And so that's why proactive decision-making is so important, because we are exposed as the Eastern Interconnection to loss of generation all over that massive geography. So that's what drives the balancing authority to follow the balancing authority ACE limit compliance measure to be supportive of interconnection frequency. It recognizes that you can fall in that, it's a graphic, you can fall in a zone that you've got 30 minutes to get out of. Your action is to get out of it. And so in that particular time, everybody was struggling with it. So if we weren't taking proactive steps to get out of it and somebody else loses a large unit, that's where you're letting physics handle the problem. And so I think that's what Mr. Batson's talking about. We don't control all the variables as an individual balancing authority for the Eastern Interconnection. Mr. Peeler, you may.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Sam. I mean, the kind of the shortest way to say it is a cascading event that initiates outside of our area. If one of our neighbors failed to take the appropriate action during a balancing scenario like what Sam's describing, and it led to a cascading event, it could certainly impact our system.
I appreciate what you gentlemen are referencing, and it's probably getting outside of the scope of why we're here today, but I think it may be worth, Madam Chair, at some point discussing some of these situations, because I'm not sure how much appreciation the commission has and really the general public has at how fragile the grid is and what could happen somewhere else that impacts whether or not the lights are on here. I just don't think that is something that we appreciate, and knowing that it could happen, especially you all have the knowledge that it could happen technically and everything else. But I think it would be good for us to have a full understanding how events in other places far away from South Carolina could impact whether or not I can use my oxygen machine if I needed it.
So just one final comment, and I'll turn it over to Nelson. So the Eastern Interconnection is a very robust system. But it's built on the principle the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, as long as the parts behave in a disciplined manner. And so that's kind of where we were at. it is a strong network across that geography, but it depends on, in this particular day, Duke Energy Progress, Duke Energy Carolinas doing the things that we did. That whole being greater than the sum of the parts. I hope that made a little bit of sense. Yep.
Commissioner
Oh, I'm-
Williams, are you through?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I think Commissioner Irvin had tried to ask a question. Commissioner Irvin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Gentlemen, you may be about to talk about lessons learned later, but I do want to go ahead and follow up on Commissioner Justin Williams' comments. I don't think any of us are trying to second guess your operators. You have a protocol to follow, and it sounds to me like you followed it to the letter to prevent further damage, and we appreciate that. But one thought that I had was, of course, Duke Energy has assets in Florida. Were you able, and Florida was not having as hard a time with the dropping temperatures. Is it possible to purchase from your sister counterpart in Florida, or from a Southern company in Georgia and Alabama and that type thing?
So we looked for all possible scenarios. We were unable to make arrangements to purchase out of Florida, predominantly to get the actual transmission arranged to route it here from Florida. Southern Company was purchasing power for themselves. They were short generation, unable to provide any energy. TVA was purchasing and actually went through several days of load shed. So there was no access to additional purchases that morning. But we did look at and do look at all those options you're offering.
And of course, ERCOT has a large wind reserve, and winds were blowing hard. I wonder, would that have been an option to draw it out of Texas?
So ERCOT has a very limited ability to export power. They have a very small interconnection to the rest of the U.S. grids. So that's not really an option to get. Even if you're nearby Texas, it's very difficult to get any power out of Texas or to sell it to Texas.
Okay. And the other follow-up I had is this going to justify another hard look at the emerging energy storage options that might be available to us? Longer-term storage. I understand that they're now exceeding, started out like 2 hours. Now they may be up to 6 or 8 hours. Is that an option that should be considered when we get into our IRP process?
Yeah, I think all options are valid for consideration on what the right resource mix is. Storage is certainly one of those.
And what about, at one time we talked about expanding the size of the turbine up at Bad Creek to generate more electricity. Is that still being considered as a future project?
Currently, Bad Creek has 4 generating units. 3 of the 4 have been upgraded at this point in time from 340 megawatts capacity to 420 megawatts of capacity. The 4th will commence an outage shortly to upgrade it also to 420 megawatts. We continue to study the addition of a second powerhouse at Bad Creek, and that it's in its early stages at this time.
Well, that's good to know. I'm pleased to hear that progress report. And I assume that it was in full operating capacity during this event as well.
The units that were available at Bad Creek were all at full outrated capacity. Unit 3 is completing its upgrade outage at this point, and actually came online for the first time today since its upgrade outage started. Those outages can take upwards of a full year to upgrade a unit because the generator must be removed from the unit and upgraded so that it can increase its power output. The runners on the units, which are basically the turbines, are also replaced with a more efficient design so that we can use the same amount of water and produce more electricity.
It's good news to hear too. What about the nuclear units? Were they at full capacity?
Of our 11 nuclear units, 10 were online, one was in a planned outage. Our total capacity is 11,000 megawatts of nuclear generation, 10,300 megawatts was in service. There were no derates at any of the nuclear units throughout this entire event.
That's good to hear. And I'm wondering, normally those planned maintenance outages are done in the shoulder months, aren't they, in the spring and fall, so that, because you're going to have peak demand in the winter and summer months. Wonder why can't we shift that maintenance outage to one of the shoulder months?
We are looking closely at outage scheduling as part of response to this particular event. And with regards to outages themselves, the outages are scheduled with the reserve margin that Sam had indicated in mind. So there is more work that is ongoing in this particular area. It's a good point.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Holman, or any of your colleagues?
Madam Chair?
Oh, Commissioner Thomas, I'm sorry.
Thank you. So, Mr. Holman, I think it was you a little while ago mentioned the system learned on day 2 from what happened on day 1 in terms of the weather was colder than expected, and whatever that system is, the program or whatever, it learned and did a little bit better on day 2, if I heard you correctly. And so my question is can that system be forced to learn even more by saying, okay, we're going to input some information here where the weather's even 10% lower than it was this last time? Is that doable, helpful, or?
Oh, yes, sir. I think Mr. Peeler can.
Yeah, I'll take that. Answer is yes, and we're working on to recognize, I'll say to recognize some of the uncertainty and some of the shortcomings in the model in those outlier periods where it does see extreme, so that we can have the opportunity to address the forecast when it's at an extreme. We've already made some progress there with the vendors that provide that tool. And so that's one of our, you'll hear Mr. Batson, that's one of our action items out of this, is to improve that forecasting during really difficult times to forecast.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Caston?
I think, Mr. Peeler, you had mentioned, I can't remember in response to whom, looking at a few things. We have enough generation sources suited for this type of weather or unusually cold weather, and, maybe even the, firm purchase agreements and such as that. First of all, let me say, easiest thing to do is to second guess. I understand that. And my greatest lessons have been learned from bad things. And I have no doubt that Duke did a yeoman's job and will learn a tremendous amount from that. But thinking in terms of, the region, where the agreements you have with others, is it unusual, and I just couldn't find it in the slides anywhere, that like I say, this storm or this event, it was coming. And I think everyone knew it was coming, and it was pretty big, and it was covering a big area. Is it unusual for such an event, whether it be extreme heat or extreme cold, to cover areas that you may be wanting to purchase power from?
So it's not unusual to affect nearby areas. It is unusual to affect such a large area all at the same time. It was a very fast moving front, and so the cold was still over a lot of the same areas at the same time. So we were seeing Indiana, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, all under the kind of these threats at the same time. So it was very widespread, more than normal. But I wouldn't say completely unusual, if that's your point.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the presentation so far.
Mr. Holman or whoever's next, let's,
I think I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Peeler.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you. So Mr. Holman covered a lot of ground, and Commissioner's questions have also helped kind of advance our presentation, which is appreciated. So what I'd like to talk about, Mr. Holman talked about the loss of purchases coming out of PJM. I'd like to touch on just a little bit of the causes of that, and I think it fits with some of our discussion about the widespread nature of this event and the impact of the interconnected power system. So as Sam mentioned, we did have power purchases curtailed in the early morning hours, really I guess between 4 and 6 a.m. That we were not anticipating. And I just want to talk a little about the origin of that. So those purchases were originating inside of PJM's footprint. And early, really a little after 4 a.m. on the 24th, PJM started experiencing some real challenges with their generation performance. The slide that you have here really comes from their presentation debrief after the event, giving some of the information about what they were faced with. And you'll see that they had, approximately 57 gigawatts of generation that was unavailable. So that's, more than 23% of PJM's generation. So they had a huge amount of generation that failed to perform. And so they were faced with the inability to serve their load and meet their committed purchases in a very short time period, over a period of just a couple of hours. And so they took some unusual steps and curtailed essentially all exports out of PJM. Very unusual. We purchased firm purchases out of PJM for many years. This is the first time I'm aware of that a firm purchase has been cut. And the only real justification for making such a decision by PJM is that they were in peril. So they had to take action to prevent shedding load or some other event inside of PJM. You can go to the next slide if you would, please.
may I ask for clarification? Sure. Can you explain that small box on the bottom left that says PJM has since reported their actual load came in at 10%?
Yes, ma'am. That's their forecast error. So just as we had challenges with forecasting the load, they had greater than a 10% error in their load forecast as well.
Okay. Thank you.
So that they had an unexpected load and then generator performance that was unanticipated as well.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Williams?
just a quick question about that. How far is that off the standard?
It's a good bit off. So we would typically expect more like 2 to 3% in kind of extreme conditions. So it's significant.
5 times.
Yeah, it's at least 3 or 4 for sure. It's a sizable error.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Williams?
Thank you. Mr. Peeler, sorry to interrupt. But what I note at the bottom of that slide is December 23rd. When did you learn that PJM was beginning to curtail exports?
It was in that 4 to 6 a.m. time frame.
Okay.
So this is a postmortem presentation that they made, and so they actually took some actions on the 23rd with some exports, but we did not get any. Ours were not curtailed, and there was no notification until those very early morning hours when we were. If you follow Mr. Holman's timeline, it was in that window of time when things were really difficult.
How much of a lag was there between the request and when you learned that they would not be able to support your request?
So these purchases were made the day before, and were scheduled. They're scheduled by the hour for certain hours to be delivered. And the notification, we did not receive a verbal notification. They cut the tags electronically in the electronic system, and that's how we saw that they were cut. You can add.
Why don't you explain what that is?
Yeah, so for purchases and sales, they're what's known as tagged. So they're made visible, if you will, on an electronic system so that people can see how much energy is moving from one place to another. So there is a tag that says there's a purchase from this balancing authority to this balancing authority. And the sending balancing authority can curtail tags for certain types of purchases. But for a firm purchase, a notification is generally required, but there was no notification. The tags were just cut, and the operators, saw the tags cut to realize that the purchases were not coming.
And we are working with PJM on that process as we speak.
Thank you.
I apologize for interrupting, but I have a follow-up question as well.
Commissioner Irvin?
Thank you, Mr. Peeler. I know that you're using the advanced logarithm available in the industry and using best practices, but it appears that there are being great advances in artificial intelligence, and I'm just wondering, you already have sophisticated weather forecasting gear on site, is that correct? I mean, you have that available.
We do. We have in-house meteorologists who produce weather forecasts. We also use National Weather Service forecasts as well for comparisons.
And so is all that information being fed into an AI system that can speed up the predictive process to kind of give you a longer view out in terms of impact when a system's heading our way?
So we have, we typically look out, the meteorology, the weather component of this, they look out, typically 7 days, 14 days, and then longer range with varying degrees of accuracy, obviously, on that. In this particular event, the weather forecast itself was actually, a couple days ahead was fairly accurate. The weather changed, though, pretty dramatically over the week. From the Monday to Saturday, we saw an 8 or 9 degree difference in the low temperature forecast in our forecast and in the National Weather Service. The bigger discrepancy in this event for us was not the weather itself, but the load that the weather drives, right? At 8 degrees, what is your customer load? That's where we had the bigger challenge of forecasting the load accurately.
That brings me to my next question. Now that we have the new digital meters inserted, I think we have them system-wide or close to it now, don't we, in the Duke Energy system?
Yes.
In South Carolina. Is there some way that we could use demand-side management techniques like giving customers a discount if they'll sign up to shut off their washer and dryer during this time period, or shut off sprinkler system or whatever, to try to reduce the load, immediately. Is that something that we need to be thinking about?
Yeah. So that reducing demand is certainly one of the options to meet the load generation balance. And some of our follow-up actions are to look for all avenues for how you might implement some type of demand-side management beyond what we have today. So I don't have particular details about it, but it's absolutely some of the things we're considering.
That's good to hear. And, we also, you all have historically done a good job with your energy efficiency programs, but those could be looked at and strengthened in the process of long-term planning. And as electric vehicle charging becomes more adaptive and perhaps cheaper, and as those home charging stations more and more installed, I understand some states have already started negotiating with customers to reverse the storage from their residential units to the system. Isn't that true?
It is. There are a number of, I'll say, early programs across the country looking at things like that.
And I think some have already been implemented, like California maybe. And I'm not sure what other states you may know. But, we're going to have to look at, I think, all available options long-term because it seems like the weather's changing. They're having snow in Southern California this week and flooding, and it's just, it seems like we're having more catastrophic weather events. So we have to plan for them, I suppose. You agree?
Absolutely. So we're certainly interested in all available options, demand side and generation side resources.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Urban. Mr. Peeler, please go ahead with your part of
Sure.
the presentation.
So I'll wrap up on this slide with just wanted to reiterate here the challenges PJM was facing with going into an EEA2. They issued a max gen emergency action, and they actually put out a solicitation to purchase emergency power, and they cut all exporting energy out of PJM. So that's a very unusual action, and even more notable is that across the morning peak, PJM was actually a net importer of energy. They were drawing energy into PJM, not exporting out. So they were not helping anyone across that peak. And the unexpected loss of those purchases for us certainly created significant additional challenges for our operators, as Mr. Holman described. One last point, and Sam made this as well. Our purchases were cut, but there were also multiple other purchases that were coming into our balancing authority that were cut as a result of these actions that were being purchased by third parties that impacted our ability to meet our overall balancing authority obligation as well. So very challenging generation availability issue coming out of PJM on that morning. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Dravich.
Thank you, Nelson.
Gentlemen, we've been going about an hour and a half, and I need to give our court reporter a short break, and perhaps y'all would like to stand up as well. So can we take let's come back at, what is that? Let's take 10 minutes, come back at 4:40, please. Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome back to this allowable ex parte briefing by Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. We have with us virtually Commissioner Irvin, and present in the hearing room we have Commissioner Justin Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carol Lee Williams, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for the brief recess, and I will turn it back over. Mr. Peeler, are you still up, or are you handing it over? Thank you. Please
afternoon.
proceed.
I'm going to provide context with regards to three timeframes: the period before the cold weather event, the timeframe of the event, and then actions that we are taking moving forward. Prior to the cold front, our operational protocols recognize the importance of very rigorous preparation to maximize our plant's reliability during extreme weather events. It includes hurricanes. We've improved the fleet's cold weather resiliency through programmatic activities that maximize protection against extreme cold temperatures, and that includes ensuring that heat tracing circuits are ready for operation. We identify areas requiring installation of structures and windbreaks, validating the insulation integrity of the equipment, and performing detailed plant walkdowns to monitor equipment performance both before and during opportunities. We routinely assess our cold weather program requirements against industry best practices and our own internal operating experience, meaning we plan, do, check, and adjust. If there is an opportunity, we will adjust our performance at all of our sites, not just the facility where the event may have occurred. On December 16th, with the impending cold weather, we confirmed that all plants had completed their cold weather preparations. And as a result, we entered the cold weather with generating fleet that we felt was prepared to sufficiently meet the forecasted demand. Since Winter Storm Uri, I'd also like to communicate that we've spent significant time ensuring that our combustion turbine dual fuel units, meaning those units that will burn both fuel oil and natural gas, are reliable on both of those fuels. During this particular event, 55 combustion turbines were made available for operation. 33 of those combustion turbines did operate on fuel oil, which represents success in this area. The other 22 operated on natural gas, which was the fuel of choice for that particular day. Some other things about the 22nd of December. 89% of our total generation capacity of 36,000 megawatts was available. 93% of our nuclear generation capacity of 11,000 megawatts was available and in service. And 88% of our total non-nuclear generation capacity of 25% was in service. What that translates to is 10 of 11 nuclear units were in operation. Robinson, which we discussed, was in a planned refueling outage. 11 of 15 coal-fired units were in service, and 8 of 9 combined cycle facilities were in service. All 55 simple cycle units were available for service and were called upon during the event, and over 90% of our hydroelectric generation fleet was available for service and called upon the event as well. During the cold front, as previously touched on by Sam, we lost approximately 3.6% of our generation, around 1,300 megawatts, from midnight through early Saturday morning. I'll take a moment to describe each. First, starting with our nuclear fleet. Our nuclear fleet units were reliable throughout the weather event and provided a continuous 10,300 megawatts of generation. Regarding our non-nuclear generation fleet, there were 4 events, all instrument related, that caused 4 units to lose approximately 50% of their generation. All 4 units had their generation restored late on the 24th and early on the 25th to allow us to provide full capacity of available generation to our customers. While fuel supplies and inventories played no role in lost generation, I'll take note that we took a few minor operational actions to address low gas pressures on the gas pipeline. Solar generation performed as expected, but it was not available to meet the peak demand since the peak occurred prior to sunrise. As the extreme cold conditions continued, our generation team worked around the clock to bring every possible megawatt back into service as quickly as possible, and also to maintain the generation that was in service. Looking forward, our improved cold weather preparation program has had a positive impact on plant reliability. For example, during the 2014 polar vortex, our coal and gas units lost approximately 3,600 megawatts due to outages and derates. Still, our number in this weather event must be zero. We're evaluating our performance, and we're looking to identify lessons learned to position us for even better performance in the future. That includes pre-staging personnel at remote sites that are at times unmanned, and evaluating the heat trace ratings on systems at every single unit. Before I turn it over to Scott, I would be remiss not to thank all of our operators, our mechanics, our electrical technicians, and our leadership that spent many hours in the cold to either return units to service or to continue to provide reliable service on the units that were not derated. This time I'll turn it over to Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Drapowicz. Let me just clarify one thing on the percentages and the amounts, the numbers, the metrics that you just gave. That is system-wide across DEC and DEF.
That is correct. That is system-wide across DEC.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Mr. Batson.
All right, thank you, Paul. What I'll describe this afternoon is really what transpired after the information you heard from Mr. Holman about the need to do the load shed. So I'll actually speak about what occurred as part of the load shed activities and the restorations that occurred, and give you an overview of that. These actions were taken per our general load shed and system restoration plan. We have a plan that's in place that directs these activities. We did follow that plan. I'll also be speaking along a timeline. Keep in mind that the timeline that I'll use is really for DEC and DEP together. So these times are approximations in terms of time, but they'll align with what you heard from Mr. Holman. So at about 6:20 a.m., the initial load shed request from the Energy Control Center was received to reduce load in DEC by 400 megawatts and to reduce load in DEP by 600 megawatts. At 6:30 a.m., the requested load shed reductions were initiated using a program we have that's referred to as the rotational load shed tool. And what this does, it allows the operators to input a megawatt reduction that's desired. It also allows the operators to put in a time or duration of the outages. And then as it reduces load and it reaches the targets that have been put in, as it pulls from a priority list of circuits, it begins rotating those circuits back on and taking additional circuits off. The intent there is to limit the duration of the outage that our customers see, but maintaining that reduced megawatt load on the system. So it rotates through circuits. We start off with the priority 1 circuits. Those were the circuits that were impacted on December 24th, and those circuits are designed to spread the rotation across all of the distribution system, but it stays away from critical infrastructure, emergency services, hospitals, nursing facilities, and those type of things. At 6:45, the automated tool worked to properly reduce the 400 megawatts in DEC, and it began cycling those outages, those circuits, on a 15-minute frequency. There were a total, there were a total of 234 circuits that were removed from service and restored within the 15 to 30 minutes that the tool was designed to do so. So we were successful with the first 400 megawatts. It began rotating through those circuits. At 7 a.m., the automated tool also worked to properly achieve the 600 megawatt reduction in DEP. But when it attempted to start doing the rotation of those circuits, we started seeing problems with the tool. At 7:05, the initial load reductions in DEC and DEP, during the initial load reductions in DEC and DEP, we recognized the need to reduce load further. So there was a request to reduce load further in DEC by additional 600 megawatts and reduce load in DEP by an additional 200 megawatts. At 7:10 a.m., the automated tool did not respond to these additional load requests on DEC or DEP. And so this required our operators to begin manually taking load off, taking those circuits out of service on DEC and DEP. Because of the time required to do this, at 7:35, the ECC actually took actions to remove two transmission circuits from service to be able to achieve the required load reduction to keep the system stable, as Mr. Holman described earlier. So at 8 a.m., the operators successfully completed the required load reductions, and we had a total of 269 circuits out of service, and the operators began to turn their attention to the requirements and what would be required to restore these circuits manually. I will note during this time, for that first 400 megawatts, we still were seeing some rotational outages occur. But at 8 a.m., we had completed the reduction. Between 8 a.m. and 9:30 a.m., the operators were assessing what had occurred with the rotational load shed tool. They were making preparations for manual restoration, and when they received notification to begin restoration, they began doing that restoration manually. There were a few things the operators were dealing with as they went through that. First of all, because they had to manually restore the circuits. Some of the things that involved, you actually heard Mr. Callahan speak of cold load pickup. Cold load pickup is a condition that can occur after a circuit has been out of service for a period of time, rather than a 15 or 30 minute outage. If it's out for longer periods at that time, longer periods, we have to look at the load that circuit is picking up when we put it back in service. Sometimes it can be 6 to 8 times the amperage that we would normally see. We have to be cautious with that because we don't want to damage the assets. You can actually cause them to burn down if they're trying to pull too much current. So they were having to be cautious as they put these circuits back in service. And it's not just tied to cold weather conditions. That can occur in all conditions. It was definitely amplified by the cold weather that we were seeing during this time. So as they were doing that, in order to limit the amount of load that was being placed on these circuits, we had to go in and the operators had to sectionalize these circuits, break them down into smaller segments as they began restoration. Where we have automation on our system, they were able to do that from the control room. But if we don't have the automation built into the system, into those circuits, it requires our line techs to actually go out and physically open disconnects so that they can sectionalize the circuits as we're putting those back in service and maintain that or limit that load that's put on those. So they began going through this process of restoring the circuits manually. Another thing that they had to deal with was, it was mentioned earlier that we had the windstorm that came through on Friday, the 23rd. It affected about 300,000 customers across our system. We restored the majority of those through the day and the evening on Friday night, but we still had some customers where there was significant damage that were still out of service. Because we were having to do this manually, the operators had to actually verify that the circuits we were putting back in service, or the portion of the circuits that we were putting back in service, were not part of the damage that we had seen on our system. Because if we had energized that, it could jeopardize customer safety, it could jeopardize the safety of our technicians that were working in the field. So as we went through the day, all of the 269 circuits were manually restored between 8 a.m. and about 4 p.m. At about 8 hours. This equates to a rate of about 34 circuits per hour that our operators went through, coordinating between field activities with the line techs and what was going on in the DCCs. Mr. Callahan mentioned earlier, the impact to South Carolina in DEC was about 78,000 customers, and in DEP in South Carolina was about 1,700 customers. But again, all of those were back in by about 4 p.m. on Christmas Eve, Saturday. We do regret that our customers were without power for this extended period of time as a result of the load shed and the problems we had with the rotational load shed tool. But I do want to point out that the operators in the DCCs, our distribution control centers, and our line techs completed all of these activities without any human performance events, and were able to work through them at that rate and not cause any additional outages or concerns with the system or for our customers under some very extreme temperatures and conditions for that day. As for the rotational load shed tool, we immediately engaged the supplier of that tool on Christmas Eve, began working with them to understand what had occurred with that tool and why it did not operate as we expected it to do. They continued to work with us through the holidays and into the new year, and we have now identified the problems with that tool. We've made those corrections, and I'll turn it over to Bonnie Tatone, who will actually provide some additional details relative to the technology.
Mr. Batson, may I ask a question? What is a human performance event?
An error on the part of the operators in restoring any type of, or restoring the circuits, or an error on the part of a technician that could damage equipment or result in an injury to themselves or others.
Okay. Thank you much.
Yes.
Thanks, Scott. As Scott mentioned, the rotational load shed tool is designed to take customers offline and then restore them within a specified time frame that you implement into the tool. And that process continues with a new set of customers, taking them offline, bringing them back online until the event is concluded. During this storm, as Scott was mentioning, when we used the tool, there was a technical issue within the software coding of the technology that's through a third-party provider itself. Because of this, that's when it's gotten to a hung state, and then it eventually had to move to a manual loading, unloading, and the reloading of the customers on that. As Scott mentioned, we engaged our third-party provider immediately. They worked with us through the holidays, and then we were able to not only reproduce the issue in one of our environments, we have since been able to roll in fixes to both defects, and those are now running in our production environment. So in other words, if we were to have another situation where we needed to use the rotational load shed tool, we feel confident that it'll work at the magnitude of the megawatt shedding that we had tried to do during that event. The other thing I would like to talk through, which you didn't hear much about today, Taryn's going to next talk to you about just the customer communication channels. She'll talk about that holistically and all the messaging that we sent out. I just would like to focus specifically on the technology challenges that we had in relation to those tools. And so during the timing of the load shed event and the rapid change of conditions, Duke had challenges across our customer channels. So I'll define the customer channels for you. That's our website, which is duke-energy.com, our mobile application, as well as what we call our IVR, or interactive voice recognition system. So I'll talk through the websites first. The Duke Energy websites allows customers to log into their applications, view their bills, make payments, start and stop service, as well as report outages. The mobile application has the exact same functionality, but just accessed via your mobile device versus the web. The mobile application, the IVR is an automated telephone system that allows callers to engage with an agent, a virtual agent, allows them to provide information, gather access to information, and solve whatever their problem is. It also has the ability to take them out into a live agent if necessary. So notifications during our general load reduction plan, in that communication plan, it was delayed due to the unanticipated and rapid need for load shed. So it just happened very quickly. Likewise, all those customer communication channels that I just talked about, we're not able to keep up with this sudden increase in the pace of transactions that we're making requests through each of those respective channels, ultimately impacting the customer's ability to have effective communication with Duke Energy. The way the user experienced this is the user saw slowness in those channels, as well as in some instances an inability to access them at all. And that started around 6:37 a.m. on the morning of the 24th, very much in line when the load shed happened. The mobile application functionality was restored around 8:24 a.m. The Duke Energy website functionality is restored at 10:36, and the IVR was restored at 10:53. For all three channels, additional servers were added and introduced into our production system, and that was allowing each of those channels to handle the increase in load that we had experienced on that day. Well, Scott's going to talk through the lessons learned. A couple of immediate things that we're going to take away is making sure that there's a better understanding of how tools are used in certain types of events. So if you think about the volumes that we experience, not only across the rotational load shed, but also on the customer channels, understanding what those scenarios would look like so that when we do our periodic testing, which happens on a yearly or sub-yearly basis, we have scenarios that are very much indicative of how the jurisdictions are going to leverage these tools. And then the other piece is around confirming with our vendor that patches are cumulative. So things that got fixed in a prior version are fixed in an upcoming version, and do validation to make sure that that indeed did happen. Maintaining and improving the reliability of our IT systems is of the utmost priority for the IT department. We'll continue to work through making sure that these items and lessons learned are taken into the future so that we don't end up in this situation again. I'll turn it over to Taryn to take you through the communication.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question?
Commissioner Caston?
That was a lot. It sounds like Duke has various softwares and hardware to, well, like with the rotational load shed, and then I guess with the
customer
text
channel
messaging and such as that. And at some point, I don't remember when, I heard something about AI and regression analysis. That's a lot of stuff, and I'm assuming you find the bugs when you need it. And relative to like I don't know if I'd say AI, but relative to using, if all these systems are at least looking at weather and stuff, probably that you talked about, Mr. Peeler, one of you guys, it's algorithms that Duke has developed, and is that what you're trying to input this information in to learn more, or to, I guess, to adjust your algorithms from a generation need, weather point of view, including maybe the hardware, software for your RLS system? Does that make sense? Because there's been a lot of stuff you've thrown this way.
You want to tackle the weather?
So the forecasting tool is not our algorithm. It's a vendor provided algorithm, and we provide weather inputs and data on our loads and our system information into it. And it's a service essentially provided that's an algorithm.
Okay, that kind of clears it up. And
it's used industry wide. It's a very widespread tool that's used by a lot of the country.
So it's not really artificial intelligence.
It's not artificial intelligence. It's a regression analysis tool.
That makes sense. And how do you pronounce your last name? Is it
Titone, Long I.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
No more questions.
Who's up?
All right. Hi. Good afternoon.
Madam Chair.
Vice Chair Powers?
Excuse me for interrupting your beginning. I've wondered, and everybody's there's an app for that, and I can sometimes get on this phone here and Google and find a number where I can talk to a live person. And I represent the PD area, which is part of the poorest areas that you deal with in your service. I'm really concerned with your customers. You have customer information when you sign them up. I'm really concerned why there couldn't be something that would point out that you're dealing with a senior citizen, medically dependent, or someone who's not in a position to even remember their password. That some number that will be available on a limited basis to certain parts of the population that need to be able to talk to a live person.
So that is absolutely great feedback and something that we should take into consideration. But we do have several programs now when a customer signs up to be able to indicate how they would like for us to communicate with them when we do outbound communications. And we do make sure that they do have multiple ways of getting in touch with us, either by calling, or they can even send an email if they would want, and I know that's not exactly the audience you're talking about now, but to make sure that they can call, and multiple teams that can handle that information. We also do have the medically essential program that will help make sure that we do understand when customers are dependent on electricity for their healthcare devices, so that we can notify them if we have planned outages coming up, or notify them if we see weather coming as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That answers my question.
Okay.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Please go ahead.
Okay, from there, so you are already aware that I have quite a bit on these slides to talk through our communication timeline. I'm not going to go through each specific item because there are quite a few, so I'm just going to summarize what all happened over the course of the days leading up to the storm, and then as we experienced the load shedding event. So Scott mentioned the impacts of the wind that we saw coming. And we knew that would likely impact our customers. So we started to notify and send preparatory messages out to customers starting on the 21st of December, letting them know that we expected weather, there could be potential outages, and to prepare for those. And then as we saw that customers were impacted by outages early in the day, and these are still related to the wind event, on the 23rd, we were communicating directly using our typical proactive outage alerts with customers to give them relevant information. As we went into the overnight hours on the 23rd into the 24th, and you already heard the detailed timeline of events, once we found out that we were going to need to shed load, we started immediately following our grid load reduction plan. And so per that plan, we used our mass communication channels, and those are many of the channels you heard Bonnie reference earlier, in addition to traditional media, so press releases, and also social media. So we quickly went ahead, put messages out in rapid succession on our outage map to make sure as customers were experiencing an outage, they could get information on the outage map. They also, we put messages out via Facebook and Twitter to reach any customers who are following on those channels, distributed a news release, updated the interactive voice response system that Bonnie mentioned, the IVR, so that when customers called in, they had upfront messaging, understanding what was going on. And also, of course, put alert banners on the mobile app and the website, so once those were fully back and accessible, customers could also get that information. I will note that we did not distribute messages directly to customers via text, as we have in many instances as part of our proactive outage alert program. The reasons for that is the amount of time this would have been an ad hoc supplemental text. So we did not have, and given how quickly we expected the outages to occur over the course of 15 to 30 minute outages, we would not have been able to get a text out quickly enough in that time frame. So our first initial, as I just referenced, our first communications out did reference that outages would last between 15 to 30 minutes. But when we received the new information around the automated tool, we updated the messages so that customers would know that we expected the outages to be a bit longer. Initially, we thought 30 to 60 minutes. And for customers, and during this time, customers were being restored. So those customers who continued to have an outage, we did continue to update those messages so that they would understand that the time frame could be a little longer. So we removed specific time frames, but did restore everyone within on the day of the 24th. So by that evening, we had everyone restored. So as soon as we knew that we were going to have folks restored, we turned our eyes ahead to focus on the evening of the 24th going into the 25th, so Christmas Day, and making sure that we could get conservation messages out to customers. So our focus quickly turned to conservation, and we did send at that point a message to ask customers to conserve on Christmas morning, and sent that out on the evening on Christmas Eve. And so we do appreciate what our customers did and the actions that they took to be able to help us with curbing that peak as we went into the next day. So throughout that, we also did the same exact thing going into the night of the Christmas night, going into the morning of the 26th, because it was also still continuing to be very cold during those couple of days. And so the work that our partners here in the room did on the generation side and the forecasting side, we're also able to send additional conservation messages out as well. So from this, it was, if we did find ourselves in this unique circumstance again, we would do some things differently as far as communications, and we've already taken the steps to be able to remedy some of that very quickly so that we could get direct messages out much faster to customers. We would be able to replace our typical proactive outage alert programs, so the typical messages customers get when they have an emergent outage. We could replace those with relevant messaging to that would let them know exactly what we were experiencing. And then also we've updated our conservation messages, ensuring that we have text and outbound calls and emails, so using multiple direct channels. Also, we're working on a broader education plan so that we can help educate our customers on the ways that they can receive information and to remind them of the tools that we have in place and where they can get things and also how to re-enroll in our proactive outage alert program if they have unenrolled in that. So at this point, I'll turn it back over to Scott Batson to wrap us up.
May I ask a question about alerts?
Absolutely.
And this isn't so much customer. Was the Office of Regulatory Staff notified at any point about the curtailments? And do you know when? Or anybody?
I don't know. Yeah, the morning of, they were notified. I don't have the exact time on the timeline here, though.
Okay. Any other? I know that y'all have to be very careful about notifying the commission, but any other government entity that needed to be, I don't know, was the South Carolina Emergency Management up at this point with the wind event and the cold? And were they notified? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, they were notified as well.
Thank you.
Emergency management.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Irvin?
thank you. Notification is an important part of the process, and going forward, I would like to request that you do notify the Office of Regulatory Staff as soon as you know that a rolling blackout event is about to occur. That's a very important contact point because they represent the public interest and perhaps could have taken steps to help you get the word out. So I hope you'll put that in lessons learned. Because as I understand it, they were not notified. If you can prove me wrong, I'd like to see when they were notified and by what means. And finally, it's not that difficult to design a program with our nonprofits. I think every community that Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolina serves has a nonprofit community foundation. And I would encourage DEC and DEP to consider setting up a donor advised fund to assist those customers whom you know are on oxygen machines. It would be a simple matter of them submitting a letter from their treating physician that they require oxygen 24/7. And if they can present that certification application to you in an appropriate format that confirms that they need oxygen 24/7, that the nonprofit would be authorized to purchase a generator, because a life was lost in Anderson County as a result of this rolling blackout. And it's very sad to know that could have been prevented had we had such a program in place. So I would ask you to add that to the list of lessons learned. I know that the nonprofits would be more than happy to accommodate and participate, because we do have a number of folks with elderly people, primarily with breathing machines or oxygenation machines that have to run 24/7. And we obviously are concerned about any loss of life. And hope you'll add that to the list. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Batson?
First, Commissioner Irwin, I will tell you that we will definitely take the action associated with ensuring that ORS is in part of our notification protocol and make sure we close any gaps there. And then we actually have the list of customers that are under our medical alert program. So I think we will be able to follow up pretty quickly in providing a list of those to nonprofits, but we'll definitely take that action.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
I know that everyone would appreciate that. We have to protect those who can't protect themselves, and it's only the right thing to do. And I applaud you for your response. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. So I will do a wrap up of what you've heard here today, and then some of the actions that we have taken as a company since the load shed event. And what I want to assure you is, our desire is for that event not to have occurred, and to make sure that we do everything that we can to prevent a future event, or if it were to occur, to make sure that our response is really minimizes the impact on our customers. So immediately following the actual load shed event on the morning of the 24th, our first focus was getting the customers back on and doing that safely. Following that, we turned our attention to December 25th and 26th, which we knew that there were going to be constraints there, limited capacity to meet the demands for those 2 days. And we took actions to ensure that we did not have to repeat December 24th and actually do load shed on December 25th and 26th. And collectively as an organization, and with the help of our customers who actually assisted us with conservation, we were able to preclude that from happening. Following recovery from the holiday there and that weekend, we stood up a team within Duke Energy that consisted of all of the operational business units. That includes the generation departments, both fossil, hydro, and nuclear, our forecasting department, our transmission department, our customer delivery, our grid, our distribution organization, along with IT, CorpCom, state president's offices. We had representatives from all of those on this team. And that team began to work immediately looking at the event, dissecting what occurred, making sure that we understood the facts behind it, and has been working since to develop a set of actions that we have already taken as a company, or that we will continue to work on as we move forward. Some of those being longer term actions and some being near term actions. I'll bucket these really just in terms of enhancing situational awareness and coordinating our internal response. One of the first things that we stood up or put in place was a set of triggers that looked at the reserves we had available, severe weather, significant weather events, challenges to generation, to look at any time we felt we could be limited in terms of our ability to meet the customer demands, customer loads, we would initiate a grid alert team. And this grid alert team works internally to really look at what are all the options in terms of either ensuring the generation is available, the health of our generation assets, what we can do in terms of purchase power to make sure that we are working well ahead of an event to try to preclude these type of impacts going forward. We're also taking steps to look at how do we factor in, and we've talked about it several times today, factor in extreme weather events like we saw into our models to ensure that they reflect the potential demand that we would see from our customers. And even when the models do not specifically drive a recognition of limited margin to that demand, where necessary, we will actually increase our capacity to make sure that we have margin that may even go beyond the models. We're looking at our performance on a day-to-day basis relative to day-ahead peak loads, really looking at our model and how well it's predicting loads during more typical weather and during extreme weather events. We're benchmarking with others in the industry to making sure that we understood what our neighbors and many of those that we've talked about today, what they experienced, what they learned from the event, how we can incorporate that into our processes and into our forecasting. And we're also looking at the behavior of our customers during events such as this. It was mentioned it was a holiday. It was mentioned that it was a weekend. And then with these extreme temperature conditions, what do the behaviors of our customers tell us about what load could be? And so we're factoring that in. We're also addressing just relative to our energy supply, things that we can do to help ensure that that's available. It was mentioned earlier about demand side management. How can we take advantage of programs there to where we can restrict load or manage certain loads of our customers to make sure we take advantage of that where it's possible to prevent some type of load shed or rotating outages. We're also looking at whenever we see a challenge to the grid, we're looking 5 days out, again, making sure that we have the capacity that we need and pursuing all options for that. Paul also mentioned that we're looking at the staffing levels for our facilities under grid alert conditions, making sure that we have the resources available on site to not only operate those facilities, but respond to any emergent issues. We're reevaluating our fuel supplies and strategies associated with that if it were to be an extended cold weather event. And then we're looking at assets that we have on our system that represent a large load to the system. What can we do in a more proactive manner where we could take those out of service if they're not actually generating and providing the energy to our customers? How can we be more active in managing our assets, our facilities? In terms of customer communication improvements, Taryn went through those. We're updating our conservation messages. We're trying to educate our customers about what the conservation means, looking at how we can be more specific with those conservation messages, such as we need you to reduce your thermostat by 4 degrees between these specific hours, rather than a general request for conservation. What can we do to help the customers help us in terms of the guidance that we provide them? Also, just looking at how we can educate the customers about many of the things that we've talked to you about today in terms of how we manage load and how we can partner with those customers. We're looking at how we can better use our emergency notifications, our proactive outage alerts. We've already talked about the medical alert process, and really looking at customers, when they become a customer, we give them an option, really for how we will notify them. And it's up to them to basically opt into those programs so that we have a means of notification of those customers. We're going to look at how we can get more customers engaged in those options and take advantage of those notification mechanisms. So we'll be taking actions in that space. Also, from an IT standpoint, Bonnie's already spoken to it, but looking at how do we make sure that whenever we anticipate a challenge like we had over the holiday, Christmas holiday, that our systems are readied to support an increased demand on those systems. And then specific to the load shed technology, we told you that we had already taken actions. We've corrected those issues, but we're going to, how do we validate the capacity of that tool and other tools that we have that help us manage our grid through testing and through training of our operators. And in the event that the tool would not work, we'll have specific written guidance that will inform our operators on the actions that they need to take. So this is just a few of the items, corrective actions that we're taking in some key categories, but we've identified a large number that we continue to work on. This team will remain in place that I mentioned before until we work through all of those issues, all of those enhancements, and get those incorporated. So with that, that'll wrap up our presentation and open to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Batson. Commissioners?
Chair Belzer?
Commissioner Carolee Williams?
Thank you. Thank you all for presenting, and it's a good exercise to not in the heat of the moment, to away from the heat of the moment, to hear what you've learned from. I have two questions, and one is you talked about the fact that this happened on a holiday and on a day when factories weren't producing and offices weren't, warming up their buildings. How does that information, how does that influence perhaps the lessons learned?
Yeah, that's one of the things we've got to better understand is what, our typical historical forecast would say it was a Saturday and it was a holiday, but it was really that shopping malls were open, those kind of things. So we've got to better understand the actual behavior. And that's one of the follow-up items we have is to really understand were our assumptions valid? In other words, were things really closed and we got that much more load or otherwise? So it's a follow-up item for us to better understand. And we're looking for ways to look at, I think one of the commissioners mentioned meter data, looking at meter data, even thermostat data to try to better understand some of the performance of actual load. So it's an action for us to better take that input and learn from it. We don't have a conclusion yet.
And I imagine that may also influence, it's a two-way street, and who gets that information when you're making requests for conservation and it is on the day before Christmas. Who received that information, and did you get data from that, and from the standpoint of who was able to respond on Christmas Eve?
We actually saw we did see the impacts in terms of the conservation. If you look at the customer data and what we have available, we definitely saw a response from our customers. To quantify that and say what percentage, I don't have that number with us today.
And maybe to put a finer point on it, how much of that response was residential and how much of that was commercial?
The majority of it over the holiday there was residential.
Okay. My other question has to do with the directive order that we made with regard to this event. And we said something like, any role, if any, that SEAM played in your process and your decision making. And if somebody addressed that, I didn't hear it. So I need you to kind of take me through that again.
I'll take that.
Okay.
So SEAM is it's a 15-minute non-firm energy only market, and it's designed for economic transactions. I'll say on the margins. You have a little bit more energy than you need. You don't have quite enough energy that you need, and it relies on a robust supply of energy and buyers and sellers. So someone willing to buy and someone willing to sell. Unfortunately, during an event like this, no one's willing to sell.
Right.
So it's never designed to be an emergency energy producer or a solution for something like this. But so during this event, there was very little activity because there were no sellers. Did that answer your question?
You did. Could there be any lessons learned for SEAM in this regard?
I think SEAM would have to expand to other products.
Mm-hmm.
The current product is not going to meet, this kind of it's not going to solve this kind of an issue, right? Because there's not a supply, not an oversupply.
Mm-hmm.
But the SEAM construct of the large number of participants certainly could look down the road and say, is there some other product that can be considered that could be valid? But that's for that group to take up and discuss.
Understood.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. No further questions, Chair Belzer.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Irvin?
Thank you. Commissioner Carolee Williams raised an important point that I think we need to explore lessons learned, and that is, had you communicated with the governor of South Carolina and the Office of Regulatory Staff and the emergency response team, and, for example, said, we have an issue with our load demand, and we'd like to request that every ratepayer, every customer in our service territory in South Carolina reduce their demand this morning so that we can avoid rolling blackouts. If you can unplug your Christmas tree, if you can reduce the use of washers, dryers, and dishwashers just for the next 24 hours. This will get us through the dilemma, hopefully, and we won't have to have blackouts. I'm just wondering if a breakdown of communication may have been a lesson learned. Would you respond to that, please? Did you hear me?
We're trying to figure out who's going to respond, Commissioner.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And it looks like it's going to be Mr. Callahan.
Sorry. Commissioner Irvin, this is Mike Callahan, coming back to the table here. I do think there are opportunities for us to learn with respect to communications. That's some of the dialogue that we've had here today, in particular, the timing of when we could make those communications. But I do want to be clear that we did do a number of phone calls, outreach to folks, ORS. We did talk to the governor's office, talked to a number of legislators over the course of that day to keep them informed. And then the communications we had with our customers asking for conservation, as you heard from the panel, that did have a direct impact on our ability to get through December 25th and 26th.
Well, I appreciate that information, but I just wonder if we could have done more. And so I'm going to ask you to try to look at that data and see, I think most reasonable people, your customers would cooperate if they knew there was a pending emergency. And maybe, could you have contacted them directly through text or email to say there's a pending emergency where, we're short of power. Can you unplug the tree for the next 6 or 8 hours? Can you reduce demand? Can you wait until tomorrow to wash your clothes? And respond to that?
Commissioner Irwin, I would tell you that yes, those would have definitely made a difference. If you reflect back on what Mr. Holman shared with us and how rapidly this event came upon us, even as of Friday evening, we were still showing using the existing models that we had adequate capacity. And so it wasn't until very early in the morning on Saturday morning that we became aware and recognized that load shed would actually be required. So the important piece for us, I believe, is really on that longer term look ahead, making sure that our models properly reflect what demand could be, learning more about our customers' behaviors, building into the margin that we've talked about a couple of times in the presentation. Because if we're looking then and we're able to predict that we may be short in terms of generation, or we may be facing a load shed type event, then we set up a situation where, from a state president's office standpoint and the contacts within the state and what we do with our customers, we will be in a better position to engage with them through whatever means, the many of the different means that we have, social media, through the public media, through direct text, to give them a notification and more of a heads up that we may be in that type of situation.
Well, thank you for that response. And you're a great company and you've done wonderful things for the Carolinas over decades. And, we just want to do better when, this was an unexpected, unfortunate event. But as Commissioner Justin Williams said earlier, we have to plan for the unexpected, and I know you'll meet the challenge. I'm gonna ask you to step up your game and meet the challenge, because there are solutions with the technology that's available today. I am confident that you can find solutions that I haven't even thought about. So I hope you will meet that challenge, and I appreciate your presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Irvin. And I think just flipping through your presentation, I saw on slide 38 the examples of some of the text messages that went out to the customers on the 24th and 25th asking for non-essential usage to try to be curtailed through Monday. And I think that's the type of text that y'all sent out directly to customers. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that is. And that is what we are trying to hone in on to get better, to give more specific tips and to be able to understand, to get us the right amount of savings that we would need. And to the point earlier, we want to make sure that we can use more than just text to do this and outbound calls. We want to make sure that that the media has a heads up as well as other stakeholders. And so all of what we've discussed, I think, would give us the notifications and awareness ahead of time to be able to do that.
Thank you. And I believe, as Mr. Ellaby indicated earlier, y'all will be filing some of the additional messages that were sent out with the final packet of materials that comes in. Is that
a
correct?
Comprehensive timeline with examples. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, Madam Chair, this commission asked ORS to look into this. ORS has sent some audit information requests to the company, and one of the requests are for all the communications. So that's been discussed at this proceeding. We're under a statutory obligation now to supplement the filing as I described earlier, sure. And we plan to do that. So the commission will see samples of all those communications.
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioners? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the information that you presented today. I appreciate your patience with us as we all try to understand. We certainly recognize that Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress and your teams have been working, and I'm sure we will hear more as y'all finish the after action report and the postmortems, but so to speak. But we do appreciate the information that you've given us. And with that, I'm going to remind everybody in the room to please make sure that you turn in your certification sheets at the back. Mr. Mustian, is there anything, do you need to confer with council and maybe staff council to make sure that anything that was mentioned is going to be covered in the provided to RS in the certification?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I will speak with Mr. Ellerby after this, but I think we're in good shape right now.
Okay, and I think there is a link embedded in the presentation, and that document will be provided as well to include in the packet. A link to some website with, I think it was PJM report.
So,
how will that be handled?
Well, I don't know. I will talk to Mr. Ellerby about that. The problem that I foresee with that is by providing the link, then it's just the source that is cited. If you provide the underlying report, then the question then becomes, do all the references that are contained in that report, do they have to be provided? And so it's, as Mr. Ellerby said, it's kind of a cascading effect.
Right.
So I'm certainly happy to talk with Mr. Ellerby about that and figure out
Let's
the
see
best
how to
way.
handle that, please.
Yes, ma'am.
If you would.
Yes, ma'am.
Again, thank you all, and we do appreciate the information and your patience this afternoon. And with that, we will conclude this allowable ex parte briefing. Thank you, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
We are adjourned.